So I'm delighted to be joined by siblings Tom and Jessie Barr to talk about their Olympic experience. Both Tom and Jessie are UL graduates. Tom completed a master's in sports performance and Jessie's a current PhD student. She's examining the stigma of mental health issues within an elite sport context. Both Tom and Jessie have competed at the Olympics. And Tom and Jessie are just back from the Tokyo Olympics. Tom competed in the men's 400-meter hurdles, and Jessie was working with Team Ireland as the sports psychologist. So Tom and Jessie, thank you so much for joining me. How are you settling back into home after the Olympics?
I moved house just before the games. So I literally was here for 3 or 4 days, went to Tokyo for 3.5 weeks and came back. So I don't feel as settled as I probably should. Considering I'm back now over a week, but yeah, it's just nice to be back. It was a long trip and it was quite tiring. So no, nice to be home and back on Irish time again.
Fantastic. And Tom, you're well settled home now?
Yeah, I am indeed. It was the bones of over a month that I was gone with a training camp and then and competing as well. And it was funny, like when we were kind of finished competing, I was kind of ready to come home then, and get back to normal life. And it's been nice just to catch up with everyone again. And after all the kind of the build up, there was a lot of hype and build up that went with it, and a lot of pressure, I suppose. And it's nice to just not be under that pressure now and just be able to catch up with people and kind of live a normal life for a couple of weeks now that I can take a break from training, and it'll all kind of build up again, then start back training in the middle of September or so.
Brilliant. It's never too much of a rest.
Yeah.
And Tom, how did you find this Olympics compared to your previous experience?
It was very different. Like I'm delighted it went ahead, but it was very strange walking into a stadium where there was no fans really. There was a couple of people spattered throughout the stadium, but walking into a huge stadium like that and it nearly empty was very strange for an Olympic Games, because normally, like, the first thing I do is I come out and you listen for your name being shouted in the stadium, or you have a look up around for Irish flags, but there was none of that. So it was a bit strange in that sense. Like, I love that kind of that build up, but there was none of that, so it was a bit odd. But other than that, the competitors were the same. The competition wise, it was the same. The village was much the same. It was a little bit more restricted, obviously, with the extra screens up in front of us. All the plastic screens in front of us and beside us for lunch and dinner. So you were kind of trying to talk, and it was just the sound was echoing back at you. So having a conversation was very difficult, and simple things like that. But no, overall, it was. I'm just glad that it went ahead, because it very, very easily could have been cancelled.
Of course. And you mentioned about how you enjoy, like, listening out, hearing your name called and that atmosphere. Jessie, I'm sure that there were other athletes who felt, not having the spectators there, it might have helped them to focus and get into their performance. Overall, do you think that it helped people, or it was a disadvantage?
It was kind of mixed. It very much depends on the individual. And I know someone like Thomas, sorry, the dog here on my lap, she's as unsettled as I am in this news. Yeah, there's some people who, like Thomas, raise themselves to that, in that environment, and they respond to the crowd. And Thomas is very much a champion performer. And we've had lots of people like that. Like Derval O'Rourke was always that person as well in athletics. And there's people who just respond to that. You can call it pressure or the excitement and the buzz around the stadium. And I think some athletes, especially those going to their first games, I think might have benefited from not having that extra hype. I was speaking to some of them and they said it was already nerve-wracking competing and knowing it was the Olympics. If I'd had 80,000 people looking at me, it would have really maybe taken my focus away from the performance. So I think it depends on the individual. If someone who naturally gets very nervous, regardless of where they're competing, if they have another 80,000 sets of eyes on them, it may have added to that. Whereas I felt a lot of athletes were able to just focus on the performance and focus on the job at hand and not get distracted. So it was really mixed. It was really, and I think it is something that is a challenge that you prepare an athlete for before a games in a normal year or for championships, is that there's going to be more hype and there is going to be a bigger crowd, and there might be people who may not know your sport as well. So it could be noisier than usual. And all of that was removed. So yeah, it really was dependent on the person and how they responded. I think a lot of athletes felt very prepared for it to be that bit quieter and have a little bit less atmosphere anyway. So I think for some it helped performance, and for others it might have taken away.
Yeah. And I suppose the one way that athletes were really able to connect with people and supporters was through social media. But I suppose we can see the two sides where athletes can really struggle with some of the, I suppose, feedback, for a better word, that they'll get after performances, and mentally trying to juggle that with what they're doing. Do you think that the role of social media at the Olympics was a positive or negative?
Again, I'm going to do that annoying psychology answer, say it depends on the person.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's pretty much the answer. It depends on the individual. And again, you know, this is something you would prepare athletes for, especially again, people, this is the first time going to the games. You know, I was speaking to one athlete whose social media following on Instagram, for example, doubled over 2 days. Right. You know, it literally doubled. And, you know, suddenly you're aware that there's a lot more people watching, because when you're at the games, and Thomas will probably agree, you are aware that if there's hype around it at home, you are very much in a bubble. And especially with the time zone, you do kind of escape the kind of hysteria around it and the excitement around it. And you can arrive back in and kind of think, oh my God, I knew.
You don't get that at home. Like, you don't see what's going on at home until you actually get home. You
don't realize how much it is. And I think, you know, social media is something that we see is out of our control, but there is opportunity to kind of control it in some ways. So some people step away from it completely, and kind of someone like Annalise Murphy, for example, is a good example that she put up on her Twitter to say, I'm stepping away from social media. My brother will be taking over my account. So she actively told people, I'm not going to be the person on the other end. So if you're sending messages, I won't be reading them. Other people might have just stopped posting, because obviously it's the posts that you put up are getting the responses. So if you don't put anything up, there's less opportunity for people to respond. Or people just made up fake Instagram accounts that they just followed stuff they wanted to follow, and maybe removed themselves from, you know, national media at home, so that they weren't going down rabbit holes. And then other people like that. Other people like that, you know, if they're natural performers, someone like Thomas, you know, I know he was active on his social media, and it was what helped him, because it was that reminder of, you know, why you're doing it. So, you know, for some it's a pressure that you need to learn to manage or remove. And for others, it's just doing what you usually do, you know, not changing how you respond just because you're at the games, or changing how you use it.
Yeah. And Thomas, you were quite active. How did you find, did you find it was a really good tool for you?
Yeah, like Jessie said, like, you know, I'm one of those people that I like to carry on as normal. And I enjoy, like, the massive bonus for me is with athletics and the level that I'm at is the fact that people at home take an interest in what I'm doing. And that gives me a huge buzz to think that you know, is being generated just from something that I've been training for years. That hype really does push me on. And like, but of course, if you don't have a good race, it can sometimes be a nice way as well, just to, rather than just kind of forgetting about it and moving on, trying to move on and just bury it in the sand. I find actually posting about it takes the sting out of it. Like, it's very hard at the time if you've had a bad performance. Like, I was very unlucky in the semi-final. I clipped a hurdle, and I was also in one of the toughest races to try and qualify for the final. So the odds were kind of stacked against me, really. But at the same time, I posted after it. I was disappointed. But, you know, then even just to see the outpouring of support underneath that post is massive. And I don't think there was one negative post, you know, on Twitter, on Instagram, because it's funny, you could get 100 nice posts and that one negative one is the one that'll stick out in your head. But often it's somebody on, you know, it can be someone on Twitter who hasn't even got a profile photo and has, you know, 8 followers, and you know, like, it's just this person that's hiding behind an alias. But yeah, it's I find it a great tool to be able to, you know, like I was saying, you don't see that hype at home, but I find it a nice way to be able to connect with people at home, and still just kind of carry on as normal. Like I would find if I came off of social media, I'm nearly feeding into the fact this is a really, really big deal. Whereas if I continue as normal, it kind of takes that little bit of pressure off it. And I enjoy it. Like, I enjoy having a bit of crack with social media, because there's absolutely nothing to do during your day-to-day things in the village.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you're at the Olympics. You are what everyone's watching, and that there is that boredom in between.
Yeah, there's nothing like, and as well this year, because of COVID, there is a recreation center where they have like table tennis things set up and PlayStations and stuff like that. But because of COVID, we were advised and told basically not to use it, because it's where people were going to congregate, and where you're probably most likely to pick up COVID if or be a close contact. So we couldn't even go and use all of that. Like, all we could do was, your day is based around, you're stripped back to the most basic human rights of, you're basing your day around eating and sleeping, and that's it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And congratulations, Tom, on running your second fastest time. I mean, that is some achievement. Of course, there was that unlucky clip of the 7 hurdle, but how are you feeling about the performance now that you've had a bit of time?
Cheers, first of all. Yeah, thanks a million. It's like, I think it's bittersweet, really. It's like every time I think about it or look at it, I kind of think of it in different ways. Like, I'm obviously disappointed because I didn't make the final, because of my semi-final draw. Would have, if I was in the last semi-final, I probably would have made it through. And also then, if I hadn't clipped the hurdle, I would have made it through. I would have run a PB. I would have run a national record. Would have had a lane in the final. Would have been Olympic finalist. The list kind of goes on as to what could have happened. But like, if I dwell on that, it's all just going to become a very negative kind of thing. But like, to know that was the shape that I was in, and it's 5 years. And the other kind of niggling thing is, I haven't run a personal best since Rio. Which is something I really do want to do, and really did want to do this season, and didn't manage to do that. So while like I had set my goals as, a PB and to make it the final, so I fell short. So it is disappointing whenever you fall short. Like, I am a competitive person, and I am competitive against myself as well, and I can be quite stubborn as when I set a goal to do something, I really want to do it, like. And I didn't manage that. So that's nearly the most frustrating part, is I didn't manage. If my goal had been just to get to the Olympics, or to make it to a semi-final, or anything like that, like, I still finished 9th in the Olympics. So when I think of it that way, it's amazing, considering the level that my event is at the moment. Like, there was 3 guys, the guys that won medals in the final all broke the old world record to get a medal, which is absolutely astonishing. So the fact that the event is at that level, and I'm right there, in touching distance of it, is really cool. And to know, it was almost nice knowing that even if I had made it to the final, I would have been nowhere near the medals anyway.
Yeah, it is just unbelievable to see that standard and those world records broken. And yeah, I suppose a little bit of respite that it was to those times.
Yeah.
And I suppose looking at that, athletes going into the Olympics with their own goals, maybe in some cases, like, we'll say 9% of the athletes that went to the Olympics came back with medals. But I'm sure that there is pressure put on by the public that they followed this athlete and suddenly they should be in the medals. But of course, the goals are so different depending on the athlete. And for some, to achieve a PB is the gold medal, or to get to a semi-final or a final is their gold medal. Jessie, do you think that there is more pressure put on people when they get to that kind of elite stage?
Yeah, I think so. I think the expectations, and it's something I posted about a bit when I was out there, like that, with Thomas was saying that it took a world record to win a medal in both the women's and men's 400 hurdles, for example. And, that was my old event as well. So it just shows because there's so much, and there's so many athletes I spoke to that, there'd be kind of jokes when they were traveling out being like, oh, she will see you now, will you be bringing home a medal? And it's like, do people realize how hard it is, first of all, to just get to an Olympic Games? There's such a small percentage of athletes who compete at a high level who actually ever make it to an Olympics full stop. And then, like you said, I know that's an interesting stat that only 9% of people who travel actually come home with a medal. I actually thought it'd be less, but still 9% is not very many people. So, I think there is this expectation that, oh, you're there now, so you're going to, you're going to make it through rounds and you can bring home medals for Ireland. And like, we only have how many medals from our whole history in the Olympics. So yeah, there is a lot of pressure. And I think it's just people's expectations don't match the performances that people are capable of. We have, there's a lot of talk about underperformances, say for obviously athletics, I'm kind of focused on because of both of our backgrounds, but there's a lot of talk about, oh, did the athletics team underperform? And it's like, well, actually, what standard were these athletes at going out? For a lot of them, getting to the games was the goal, and anything beyond that was a bonus. But suddenly then when they're not making it through rounds, it's a failure. And it's like, no, the success was getting there and becoming an Olympian. And, for people who are, qualifying in at the last minute and, not having time to actually just go back into training, they may have got their qualifying time on the 2nd of July and suddenly on the 20th of July, they're at the Olympics. It's kind of, is the expectation actually matching what their capabilities are? Probably not. And I think that needs to be made clearer when the athletes, rather than, obviously the success was in, the success was in, we had the biggest team ever traveling, and that was brilliant. And those kind of successes get Lily. Sorry, she
wants attention.
She disagrees. What do you think, Lily? Come here. Come on the toilet. I think sometimes we need to be more mindful of like how hard it is to get to a games, and actually making sure that people know that, rather than it always, as soon as people are on the team, it switches to medals and performances. Performances are important, but is that person's performance relative to where they're at the moment? Because, like Thomas is one of our best athletes that was on the entire team, and he didn't come home with a medal. Did we see that as a failure? No. But, I just think, sometimes the expectations just aren't realistic and don't match. So there needs to be more, a more realistic expectation of our athletes to travel out. We are, it's a global competition, it's the biggest it gets. And yeah, it can be hard because you see athletes coming home disappointed, and there is that little bit of, oh, you didn't do your best out there. You didn't, it's very hard to get a PB. As you said, Thomas hasn't run a PB in 5 years. They don't happen in every race. They're not like when you were 12 and every time you entered a race, you're on a personal best. So, when you get to that elite level, any progression is really, really hard. So yeah, I think that's the little gripe of mine, is that expectation kind of always, it doesn't quite match up with what the performance capabilities are of the people. And that needs to be kind of spoken about more, maybe going out.
I think it has gotten better though in the last couple of years, in fairness. Like I remember when we were a few years ago, Jess, say when we were going out to major championships, it was kind of almost just the only hype. I think that's where something like social media has actually helped, in that you're actually, you nearly feel like a more personal connection with the athlete. And also there's more people are able to explain to the hobbyist, or the couch critic, as you might call him, is able to explain, no, look, this is the stat. So people can get more information as to, the actual position, or, relative to how somebody has performed, as to how they actually have done. So, and I think as well, like there's a lot of, and obviously there was a lot this year in particular around mental health in sport and and stuff. So I think people are more mindful about putting perspective on people's performances before they jump to, oh, well, that was terrible. So I think it has gotten a lot better, in fairness. We have a bit to go, but we're getting there.
No, I agree with that. I think so, as much as social media, we kind of make it like the enemy. Actually, it's kind of the friend of the athlete, because it gives them control of their narrative. If an athlete puts up that they're really happy with their performance, they ran a personal best, or they were really happy to be there, people are more likely to feed into that. Whereas like that, if there's that radio silence, you form the narrative for the athlete and their performance. So, even like that, Simone Biles was able to control her narrative through her Instagram, rather than people kind of making assumptions about what was going on for her. She was able to come out and say it. So yeah, I think it's definitely gotten better. Look, there's always going to be pressure, and it's Olympics, something that for the first time, people who never watch sport are suddenly watching. So it's maybe people who are a little bit less informed are kind of making assumptions. But I think the people who are informed kind of understand and know what's what.
Absolutely. And Jessie, of course, you were at this Olympics on a different capacity to what you would have before. How have you found the transition from being the athlete to being part of the support team?
I won't lie, it's been hard. I found the transition out of sport difficult anyway, because I felt like I was leaving the sport knowing I had more to give, and I just never got a chance to show it. Like at training, I was able to show my best, but it just never happened at competitions between injuries and different things. So that made it hard anyway, because you're looking back, like Thomas was saying about, you know, the final, those what ifs really, they kind of haunt you a bit. If I'd done this different. The transition initially into support staff was strange, because suddenly I was working at the institute and there was people who I was friends with who were athletes, and I was staff, and that kind of passed. That was fine. And I actually said it to Thomas, that because our coaches Hayley and Drew were both out in Tokyo and Thomas was there, so there was one or two days that I went to the training track when we were still at the holding camp, and I was standing at the track and Thomas was doing the drills that I would always have done, and I was standing there beside my old coaches, and it all just felt a bit surreal. And I got this overwhelming feeling of, I want to be doing what he's doing. I don't want to be doing this anymore. And it just had hit me like a ton of bricks, because I hadn't really felt it in a while. And I think it was just because it was just all that familiarity. And the only difference was I was in a different position. Everyone else was still doing what they always did. And I found that really strange. And then it was gone. It was fine. And I love what I do. But just for that moment, I was like, I want to be still competing. And then I did a little bit of a jog around the track and realized how unfit I was, and I was like, no. I truly hung up. But yeah, it's a tough one. And I think any athlete, when they retire, whether like I stepped straight into a career and I was very, very lucky, or whether you have no plans, it's really difficult, because it's such a big part of your life. It was my identity. I was Jessie, the 400 hurdler, and it was what people, you know, the first thing people asked me about when I met them was, how's training? Are you still injured? When's your next race? So suddenly that part of your identity is kind of just gone. And that was the hardest thing. So I'm still sometimes seen as Jessie the athlete more so. So I'm still trying to kind of make sure my identity as sports psychologist is first and foremost. But yeah, I think it'll be something I miss. I could stand on a track when I'm in my 70s and go, oh geez, I'd love to do a few hurdles there. So I think it will never be something that will truly leave me. But I think being in those like that, it was kind of ripping the plaster off. Like I did it. I felt that overwhelming feeling being with my coaches. And then the next time I went back, I was absolutely fine. So you know, I think it's a transition that it's kind of bumpy. It's a bit rocky, but no, I'm very happy with what I'm doing now.
It's amazing how you have come through such a similar pathway. And yeah, I can imagine that, like, even going through the same drills, and Jessie thinking, gosh, I've been here before. Yeah. But I saw an article that Hayley and Drew did recently, and they spoke about like how education and elite sport, how they actually complement each other. And I'd love to know how you find juggling those, massive commitments.
When I actually came to college, when I came to UL first in 2010, straight out of school, I was kind of coming for the academics more than the athletics side of things, because I was by no means a good athlete back then. Like, I was okay in my age group for national level, but like I was way off the mark internationally. Like, I didn't think international was ever even an option for me. That was this faraway place that Jessie traveled to. She did all you went to the juniors, you went to the youths, you went to all the schools competitions and everything, whereas I kind of it was more of a hobby for me. Like, I enjoyed it socially, so that it was, you know, even when I moved up to UL and joined the group with Hayley and Drew, like, I was kind of on the cusp of giving up athletics, because it does take a lot of a discipline, a lot of time and effort, and I was kind of wanting to spend more time, maybe start, you know, getting involved in other activities. There was a huge amount of, you know, I went to the Clubs and Socks drive down in UL, and there was a load of sports and activities that I could have, you know, gotten involved with, but it was, you know, we meet at this time on a Wednesday, well, that clashes with training. We meet at this time on a Saturday, well, that clashes with training. So, there were a lot of, I was kind of thinking, am I still really in this for the right reasons or not? And I remember talking to Mum after I had kind of made the decision in my own head, and she kind of said, look, just give it another year under Haley and Drew. You've seen what they've done for Jessie. So I gave it that year, and then that was my kind of real turning point where I started I made it to my first Europeans, the European Junior Championships, and ended up finishing 6th out there. So that was my turning point as to where I really started to become the athlete as such. And like, I did mechanical engineering, so it was tough balancing because there were a lot of hours, but at the same time, athletics was my 2 hours of every day where I could guilt-free get away from the study, get away from the books, and meet up with this whole new friend group that I had made in the training group. Like, it was, I was nearly always busy. I was constantly busy, but at the same time, I like being active. I like being busy. I like being kept on my toes, kind of working towards different things. So it was nice to have the balance of both while working towards getting a degree and also working towards, competing internationally. So both of them were working while it was busy. I was actually, it was an extremely productive couple of years.
And do you think did you receive a lot of support in UL, I suppose, both from the academic side, trying to facilitate all that you were doing from the sport, and then from the sport getting you to that next level?
I did. In fairness, UL paid for many years of my accommodation under the scholarship scheme, so that helped a huge amount. And then also, we had access to all the facilities, the gym, the track, and everything at any stage. And yeah, in particular, when it came to my work experience, in third year, first semester, the college were extremely accommodating because I needed to kind of stick nearby Limerick to try and continue training while on work experience. So I ended up getting a spot in Ennis. So it was only half an hour, 40-minute drive, which was perfect. It meant that I was able to train in the evenings after work. And only for the fact that UL were happy to accommodate that because I was training. It wouldn't have happened. I could have ended up anywhere in the country, really. So no, it was a huge help to and as well, like, UL is they thrive on sport. It's just, as it is, it's a sporting campus. So I think when you're involved in sport, they are happy to help out, and it's been brilliant to have that. I don't know, would you get it the same in a lot of other colleges?
So during COVID, you didn't have access to UL's facilities, and we saw many people in their backyards. They did triathlons and built makeshift pools and everything. Did you have any mad DIY training plans in the garden?
No, we've quite a small back garden, but we did convert the sitting room into a gym. So bought squat rack, weights, barbells, and a treadmill. So we kind of worked away out of there for a lot of the winter and through the times when we couldn't train. So no, it was grand, but I didn't go mad down the hole doing I saw people were climbing Mount Everest on their stairs and doing mad. No, I didn't get involved in any of that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And do you think the Masters in Sports Performance has given you a competitive edge now as an athlete?
I think I took a huge amount, not only just as a degree going forward, but for myself to take as an athlete, to learn. Like, I learned a huge amount, especially about like nutrition, biomechanics, the side of things that, like, I was nearly kind of just told this is why you have to do it, or I was just told this is what you have to do. But I'm like, coming from the engineering side of things, I always like to know how things work and why I'm doing something or why you do something a certain way. So I took a huge amount from that for myself that I kind of took into my training and athletics, and yeah, definitely gave me a bit of an edge.
And I'd also love to know why did you choose to stay on in Limerick?
It was the training group and being coached by Haley and Drew. Like, that's, I I've settled into that group really well. The training suits me really well, and I love the group. So I kind of have made Limerick now my second home, if you like. So I'm sticking around for a little bit longer than I thought I would be nearly 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago.
Wonderful. Jessie, you're currently researching the stigma of mental health issues within an elite sport context. Could you talk about where you're at with your research?
Yeah, I thought we were going to laugh. It's been long. It's taken up a lot of my time and my life. But yeah, I'm in the write-up phase at the moment. It all obviously kind of got disrupted. Like the build-up to the games ended up being a lot busier than I anticipated. But even from when I started the research back in kind of 2016, there's definitely been a change in the attitude towards athlete mental health. And I think the Olympics really highlighted that. So if I'm never going to do another follow-up or a postdoc, but if there was, there'd definitely be, how COVID and how this kind of time during the pandemic has changed the attitudes and maybe lessened the stigma towards mental health. Because I think, initially my research was finding that there was a significant amount of, or there's a significant perception of stigma within the public. So while athletes were kind of saying, and staff, I interviewed staff as well within elite sport about their attitudes, they were very positive towards, mental health help seeking, using psychological services, clinical psychology, all that. There was the feeling that there's a negative perception within the public, and that was the major barrier. So it wasn't necessarily that people were stigmatizing themselves, but they felt that if I do seek that help, I may be stigmatized externally. And that was the biggest barrier. And that was the most interesting factor I found. And, learning how we're going to try and break down that barrier and that perception. But I think things like the games, the time we spent in lockdown and everyone, the conversation around mental health was much more prevalent, and everyone was talking about it as it wasn't something that is only for people who have something wrong with them. This was, everyone has mental health, a state of mental health, and, simple things can affect it both positively and negatively. And I think, even away from an elite sport context, people are now realizing the importance of it and how it can be affected by certain things. And I think then in elite sport as well, we saw that with the likes of Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, there's been a lot of really important conversations have started around it. And there'll always be people who are naysayers and saying they're just saying it for attention. But, I think it's brought some really important, conversation around it, and realizing that the elite sport world is a unique kind of situation. They are normal people in a very abnormal environment. Elite sport is not a normal environment, and it's very high pressure. And, the same way as it would be in a high pressure business, or if you're in some other kind of business. Lily, let me just stop, sorry. If you're an elite athlete, your career is very short. You're in a very short time span. So you're trying to do an awful lot. You're trying to fit a whole career that someone else might have in 40 or 50 years, maybe into 7, 8, 10 years of your life. And then you're kind of spat out at the other end, potentially, into a new career, that you may not have been prepared for. So there's a lot of challenges. We've talked about social media as a positive and negative, and it definitely can have an influence. You saw how Simone Biles went in with that kind of GOAT label, that greatest of all time label, and how that actually weighed on her. So even though some people may really respond well to that and rise to that challenge, she found it hard. So, I think it's, in terms of my research, it definitely probably would have taken a different way, a different path if I'd started it now, because there definitely was more of a stigma towards it when I started. And it's really positive that I can kind of say in my discussion and my conclusions that the stigma has reduced naturally, but we still have some way to go. So it's a tough one. It's tough reading. The papers around it are not very uplifting when you're reading about, prevalence of depression within athletes, or, prevalence of anxiety disorders, but it's really important. And I think the awareness is definitely there now, and hopefully my research can just add to that.
Absolutely. And it is great to hear that you're seeing that shift, which is so needed and a brilliant move. And so I suppose the question of what's next for both of you, Jessie, is it a case of really I suppose immersing yourself in the PhD and pushing forward with that while you're doing your full-time job as a sports psychologist?
Yeah, the plan is now that I have a little bit more time, like that post games time, because it's the first time I've worked at the games, I'm still learning what it looks like. But this time post games is that little bit quieter. We obviously have debriefs and check-ins and stuff, but a lot of people are on extended breaks and are not, I'm still working with some athletes who are at the Paralympics, so I'm not quite off yet, but I'm definitely not as busy as I was in the lead up to the games. But I'm going to definitely take some more extended time out between now and Christmas just to try and get this done and get it off my plate, because it has been something that's held me back a little bit going forward. And just balance. Because I'm living in Dublin, it definitely makes it easier working in the institute. I was always commuting. So even those extra few hours I've gotten back in the week will help. And then just immerse myself back into sports psychology in the institute. And I think we're kind of realizing that our budget for psychology may increase because we were so busy during the pandemic. I think, like I was saying, more people were turning to psychology and to, looking for that support than were before the pandemic. So we are all busier. We have a lot of new clients. And there are new kind of athletes on our books. So hopefully in the new year, I'll actually have more work within the institute. Just kind of, I'm open to whatever comes my way once that PhD is gone, to be honest.
Brilliant. And Thomas, if the Olympics wasn't enough, I also have to ask, what's next on the plan after a well-deserved break?
Yeah, so I'll get back into training around mid-September, back into the winter slog for another couple of months of torture and training before kind of building up towards. We have a big summer next year because the World Championships, which should have been on this year instead of the Olympics, are actually have to be pushed forward to next year. So next year we have a European Championships and a World Championships in the one summer. So that's what we're working towards then in the next block of training. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to just getting back into the routine of training again and back into winter training. As weird as it sounds, I'm actually looking forward to it.
Wow.
We love the misery.
Brilliant. Well, we must have a peep at Lily.
I know, you can see her ears twitching. She's quiet.
Oh, she's just...
This is the little thing opposed to all that noise and hassle, isn't it?
She was missing you while you were away. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, no, she was a Limerick dog. So we're both a bit out of sorts up here in Dublin, aren't we? Because I was the same as Thomas. I lived in Limerick for over 10 years as well. So it's a big adjustment for all of us. But yeah, she'll quieten down hopefully, because there's only so many Zoom calls I can do where I'm darting in and out to the back door.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Thomas and Jessie. It's been brilliant to catch up and find out how this Olympics went for you and to get an insight into how it was. And the whole UL community, I know they'll be delighted to get this insight. So thank you, congratulations, and the very best of luck now.
Nice one. Thanks, Niamh, and thanks as well to everybody who has been kind of following along and supporting it. It's meant a huge amount. So yeah, cheers for having us on.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed the posts about the extended UL alumni that have been involved in the games. It was, it was really interesting to see how many people have had a hand in it, kind of directly or indirectly. So it's been nice to be part of that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank
you. No worries.
you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.